things take time. Things that are worth it take time.
Heidi ho! Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, digital marketing dude at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com for any help with podcasting or digital marketing. This is episode number 48, and today's guest is Shama Hyder. She's the award-winning founder and CEO of Zen Media, and she's been called the Zen Master of Marketing by Entrepreneur and the Millennial Master of the Universe by Fast Company. She's also been honored as one of the top 100 young entrepreneurs in the nation by the White House and the UN. You'll hear her story, plus tips on creativity and productivity. It's Shama time. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Shama Hyder, the amazing marketer, the Zen Master of Marketing, and that's actually a name you've been called, Shama, hasn't it? I didn't just make that up, huh?
You didn't, and thank you so much.
Of course. Shama as an umbrella, as it's known. How are you doing today? We really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Excited to be here. Always love talking about my favorite topic. So,
of course. Yes, same as well. So for anybody that's not familiar with you yet, how do you describe yourself?
that I wear a lot of hats. I think the first thing that obviously comes to mind is being, an entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Zen Media. We're a web marketing, digital PR firm with global clients and one of the earliest players in the social media field. I've also authored 2 books. So it's funny, people generally know me like one facet, and then there's like, oh, all this other stuff. So some people might know that I'm the author of The Zen of Social Media Marketing, which is in its 4th edition, and it's used as a textbook to actually teach social media in college classes around the world, which is pretty cool. And Momentum.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, it's fun. It was such a fun experience. And Momentum, which is about marketing in the digital age, which came out not too long ago, and an investor and a keynote speaker. So I wear a lot of hats, right? But the underlying theme is I really love helping brands and people understand like how to thrive in the digital age. So everything I do is really an offshoot off of that sort of greater mission, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And I'm feeling the Zen already. I love this Zen brand that you've created. And of course, your books are they're bestsellers and people cannot stop talking about them. So you really created some buzz there. But I was just curious how you describe yourself because you're up to so many different things. It's always interesting. All right. Well, what's your biggest focus? That sort of thing. But it's impressive.
Sure.
It's impressive you set a Guinness World Record for number of hats worn at the same time. So congrats on that.
Thank you. That was actually a campaign we ran for a client.
Oh.
So yeah, I personally am not the title holder for that, although that'd be kind of cool. So one of our clients, it was we did work for years with the Dallas YMCA Capital One Turkey Trot. So if there's any runners listening to the podcast, like Dallas's Turkey Trot tends to be one of the biggest in the country. It attracts over 40,000 people, so it's massive.
Wow.
And so we're responsible for all their marketing and PR for multiple years until the lead Capital One sponsor moved on. Anyways, so it was one of the things that we did one year to really build up buzz, and we love doing stuff like this. It's so much fun, was getting to see how many people we could get to wear turkey hats and dress up like turkeys in a given spot, right? Because it's a turkey trot. So
yeah. Well, what else do you do with the turkey hat?
Right. So we had all these people, and it was cool. They got to win. We got to help our client win a Guinness World of Records for the most number of people wearing turkey outfits and turkey hats in a given space. So we had, it was fun. It was such a fun event. But we love, I mean, that's the cool thing I think about being marketing is and PR. You get to do so much like fun stuff. And when I say that, a part of me is always like, wow, people are going to think it's all fun and games all the time. And of course, that's not true. But, it's just the work you get to do is creative. if you're doing it right. I know
Right.
it's pretty creative and it drives results, right? So that wasn't like the record for the record's sake, but it really helped build a lot of buzz for our clients. And actually, more people showed up that year than had in the history of however many decades the run has been going on. So things like that are pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you have me wanting to try in a turkey hat. That's something I haven't done yet. So so you got the Thanksgiving juices flowing. But so back to the start of your career, how'd you get into business in the first place?
So interestingly enough, as a kid, I was always very entrepreneurial. Like, and it's funny how many people I meet like that are that way, and I find more and more that I think this is something you're born with. Not that you're born like a great entrepreneur, but I think that gene, like there's something in the genetic coding that I'm sure they'll find that says, oh, and by that I mean I was just always very curious about the world at a higher risk tolerance than other people.
Hmm.
I'd always had to like something productive or project, I mean, I just wasn't one of those kids that like sat around and watched cartoons all day. And so, but yeah, my foray into the business world is interesting because part of it was I knew what I was passionate about, and it wasn't like making money or commerce. It was more technology and communication. And when I first got into school, or even when I was younger, I thought I'd be a journalist. That was sort of my career path.
Oh.
But of course, by the time I get into college, right, journalism is changing massively. So I'm like,
Yeah, just a
this
little bit.
career that I thought I was going to have is no longer, and it's not a viable option. But I got so lucky because what I get to do is a combination of all these things that I have loved, and I couldn't fathom putting that together when I started. But yeah, so I started the company right out of grad school. I
Huh.
was 22, learned a lot of things along the way, and that was my foray into business. So it was, to me, I always tell people, when you're starting a business, when you're doing anything, you have to think about where passion meets market demand. So many times people are like, oh, I'm really passionate about it. Great. But if there's no demand in the marketplace, it's a hobby at best, right?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just when people expect that to like then pay their bills or have a hard time with it. And it just doesn't, I think that's I think it's hard to mesh versus when you find something you love to do and then you find, hey, there's market demand, then you have a business. You have to look at, what does the market want? And I find like sometimes people don't really want to do that part so much.
Yeah, it's the hard part. It's easy. I mean, there's so much effort just for people to find their passion and really hone in on what they're doing, but on what they love. But what you mentioned is so important is there's more than just one side of the equation there. So the market demand there, how do you go about finding that part?
Research in the market, I find, gives you pretty good feedback pretty quickly, especially today, right? And like that's the power, I think, so much of social and whatnot. Like one of the things that we do with clients too, is some of our enterprise level clients especially, is we'll test out ideas in the real world for them and then go back and say, hey, should you invest millions of dollars in this idea? So it's not just like market research in the sense of surveys and things, it's actual, are people buying this? How are people going to respond if you enter into the market with this offering? And yeah,
Yeah.
you could do that so much easier today. I think the harder part is, can you take that information in a way that's objective, where it's not, where you don't feel like it is a personal insult that they don't want that, or you keep trying to see how they would. So I think part of it is just being honest with yourself and what you're seeing, and then going from there.
Yeah, I completely agree. You got a lot of times you got to look inwards before you start producing output. Let's talk about your company, Zen Media. So you are the Zen Master. I know this isn't your official title, but I'm calling you the Chief Zen Master there. So, so you mentioned that you started Zen right after grad school when you were 22. How the hell did you decide to start your own company right then versus going in a totally different direction, which may be a more common direction?
Yeah, I think in my case it was more like what I was good at, what I was wanting to do, what I was passionate about. There wasn't a market for it, as in not market demand for it, but it didn't exist yet, right? So
Hmm.
when I wrote my thesis on Twitter, there were only 2,000 people on Twitter. And don't get me wrong, my first inclination was to go to McKinsey and Bain and some of these companies and say, hey, I want to do digital, I want to do social. And they looked at me like I was nuts. Like they were like, what is that? Like it was so
Did you
new.
come from the future? Yeah.
Yeah, it was so funny because it was like, okay, because you do these like meet and greets when you're in college and you're like, I'm really excited about it. And then to be like, okay, well, here's how we do our case study interviews. And I was like, wow, like, okay, clearly not, you're not
Not a
getting
strong fit there.
yeah, like not, but the part of, I think, business and marketing, and one of the things you learn is if you don't have alignment with your audience, sometimes it's not that the idea isn't as solid, it's more about finding the audience where it might align better.
Hmm.
And so for me, what I really wanted to do that, and I was sort of baffled that these big companies at the time weren't interested. I later came to realize, and in recessionary times, which is when I graduated, what you find is big companies often pull back. They want to do less of.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want to take risks. It's all about holding on to what they have. But what you find in those times is smaller businesses tend to get more innovative. They're like, I'll do whatever it takes to get business in the door. So if that means, like trying this newfangled concept, sure. So my first clients were small businesses. We've grown so much since those days, and most of our clients, they tend to be enterprise or middle market. But it's so funny because those were the folks that were initially like, yes, let's try it. And those are where you got the case studies and where you could test out concepts and without a lot of red tape and bureaucracy and really
Mhm.
deliver.
Yeah, it's interesting that your clients have grown in size. I mean, just in terms of how big of companies they are, as you've grown as well. So,
Right, because eventually people are like, "Oh, let's talk digital," or like, Now it's just funny. Sometimes these companies that I was trying to explain this to now have entire divisions or acquiring firms and all this stuff, and I'm just like nodding my head, going, "Oh my God."
holy cow!
you know, yeah, like a few years, 10 years ago, these guys were like, "What? Like we don't even know what this is. Like, why are we even, like this is going to be a fad?" And it's so funny how many times I remember being on like Fox and being on, TV, and I do a lot of media, and they would ask like, "Oh, like, do you think social media is a fad?" And I was like, I can't, I can't believe people used to ask that question.
Oh my god, no one wants to believe it until it has some staying power for a few years or sometimes decades
Right?
before it really catches on. And so social media is a whole mess of so many different things and trends and hot apps and fat app. Like it's it's a whole beast of its own. But you mentioned those early clients. How'd you get those first few small businesses to start working with you? Can you take us back to that time?
Sure. I educated the hell out of them.
That's a good
You
approach.
know, I mean, it really is, and it's old-fashioned hustle in the sense of working hard. Like, I would literally go to conferences, type up my notes, because one thing I was really good at as a student was like, I was like, I can take great notes. I'm gonna use this. I would take
Noted.
great notes, right? Then at the conference, I would say, hey, if anybody wants notes, just give me your business card. I'll email you the notes. And most people would be like, great, yes. Like, this girl was scribbling away, sure. And it's, when I started my newsletter and blog. So right from the beginning, and use, of course, social and digital. Like, even to this day, the clients that we get are referrals from other clients. It's our own presence. It's not outbound sales. It's not cold calling. So those methods still are very much, what works.
Yeah, it is, and I'm impressed by your note taking ability, and I'm sure it still stays. I'm sure it still stays that way to this day.
It's not as solid as it was, trust me. You trade it for other skills, but when you get out of school, one thing the school does a great job of teaching you is how to take notes. So,
it's
good
it's
or bad, it is what it is.
it's very true. What can you point to as the biggest way that you've been able to grow Zen?
I would say that constantly being able to stay on top of trends. And, because it's
Hmm.
funny, when you're in an industry like ours where clients look to you to know what's next, you have to know what's next before anybody else does.
Right, predict
Right?
the
I
future.
mean, yeah, I mean, in some ways, and we do that every day. So part of my time, a big chunk of my time actually goes in research. and seeing what's next. And in some ways, I feel grateful that it's sort of an innate ability, but also just needs to be honed, right? So I'm
Hmm.
constantly looking at what's next for our clients. Like, and part of our growth has been because of that, because we're not, the things we are sharing with them isn't just what works now or yesterday, but what's going to keep them relevant maybe, 5-10 years from now. Like, one of the things that I'm so passionate about right now, and I'm, waving the flag of, is this idea of the connected consumer.
Hmm.
People have such a, people still put, their customers into boxes like, oh, that these are millennials, this is Gen X, this is baby boomers, but really there's this common thread of these are connected consumers. And what I mean by that is people like you and me. It's just how we make decisions, how we use technology, how we incorporate it into our lives, like how we make buying decisions. Like, our clients are often surprised when I share with them that what we find is a lot of people, big chunk of people, majority of your customers, actually search for your product and services after they've purchased them.
Huh.
Because we come from this world where it's like, oh, well, customers want choices once they've bought, it's done. And it's really not. What we're finding is there's more kind of anxiety around, did I make the right choice? And the more, companies can do stuff post purchase to make sure that they feel like, okay, I did make the right choice, that's where they're going to trigger loyalty and the next purchase and so forth. So
Yeah, it's incredibly connected. So let's use that as an example. So this concept of connected consumer, which we see all the time, and kind of meta when you think about how we see it on social media. But when it's something like that, when did this sort of pick up steam and you're like, okay, this is really a big theme. This is something that's bigger and bigger. Like, when did the kind of the beacon go off for you that this is a big thing to focus on for the next, you know, foreseeable future?
I'm not sure there was like one moment, it's definitely been a gradual, like, okay, we spent a year doing research. So there's actually a white paper with all the findings on zenmedia.com,
Mm.
which you can check out, which we, spent a year doing a deep dive into what makes consumers tick, what are sort of, and we found all these paradoxes, right? Like, a very interesting, consumers are like sort of this, you're like marketing to gods right now, right? And in the same breath, they're quite also unsure about the decisions that they're making and need sort of more of that confirmation. So I think in those ways, it's a very interesting research and read. And, and we're finessing it every day. So everything that we're doing, that's the thing. It's like, in this world, there's no stop, right? There's no like, okay, got it. It's not every day there's something new. It's about, staying ahead, staying on top of stuff. So
Yeah. And we'll link out to that in the show notes, that white paper there. So research is clearly very, very important to you and your agency. Can you give us an example of maybe a case study from a client or a campaign that you can think of that you've had a big hand in where research came up key with the actual result?
yeah, there's so many. I mean, said, we part of the way we do research is so different than like traditional market research, because it's digital market research. We're actually trying things and feedback, and our
Right.
research is also not static. And that, when I say research, people think library books and sites.
Yeah, you got to get the library card and
No, research to me, us even is more what's working with their clients, which is kind of cool, right? Because the more successful you get to be, I think, in a field, the more you get to learn, which to me is honestly the most gratifying aspect. So I'm
Mhm.
always learning. And my husband yesterday was joking, we were talking, and we're just talking, and he was like, I'm always amazed as to like how much stuff you know, and and, and so many subjects. And I was like, well, I read a lot, and he said, I know. And he said, but you retain it.
That's the hard part.
And so I was laughing. I was like, I guess, I think I get it from my dad. I was laughing at myself too, because my dad is very much a veritable like encyclopedia, and not of useless facts, but you could just be like, Dad, I have a headache. And he'll be like, oh, just drink this, drink this much water, and they do this. And you're like, oh, that helps. It's so weird. Anyway, so
That's a very helpful trait in a parent whenever they're
it
a
is
human
very,
encyclopedia.
very helpful. I mean, for any random, like, it's just amazing the things, my dad will know these sort of broad, like, that geography and tribes. Anyway, so I think I get a lot of that from him. But
Yeah.
sorry, not to digress too much from you.
No. Well, now you spark my curiosity because I like to learn as well. What does your dad do professionally? That he is a encyclopedia.
Funny, my dad is an entrepreneur as well.
There we
He
go.
was a mechanical engineer by trade, like what he graduated and his degree was. But it's funny thing, my parents were blue collar entrepreneurs, and we came into this country when I was 9 years old. My dad drove a taxi cab. He actually drove, when he first came here, he drove an 18-wheeler, and he didn't even know how to, like, he had never driven in the snow
Oh my
before.
God. That's a
So
lot
it's
of
just
wheels.
like, it's crazy, like the stories he shares, he was just
Yeah,
nuts.
slipping
And
all over
then,
the place.
oh man, and just the things it's so for me, like I am an immigrant because I wasn't born here. But my parents are immigrants as well, of course, and so it's just an interesting dynamic, and I think part of
Yeah.
the way I was raised is very much you are so grateful for the opportunity you were given and you make the most of it, and you don't expect anything to be handed to you in the most
Yeah.
positive way. So I'm always shocked. People are like, "Oh, I should get this right." Is it like the sense of entitlement is so foreign to me because
Yeah.
I grew up with the complete opposite, and all from a place of gratitude, just grateful to be in the country, just grateful to have a job, just grateful to like be able to have an opportunity to serve and move up and all these things. And so I find part of that is it goes hand in hand with learning. So my dad, my parents, both of them never felt like what they did defined them fully. They were such multifaceted folks. And I recently actually did this video on my thoughts on the college scandal too, because I
Oh
know
yeah.
about
That's a good one.
which is crazy because
Yeah.
that was the other thing. People assume because of an Indian background, they're like, oh, your parents must have wanted you to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And I was like, nope, none of the above. The only thing my parents ever wanted for my sister and I is to be happy. Like, what a shocker, right?
That's amazing.
they,
Yeah.
yeah. So we never had any pressure to go to a college or get a certain grade or any of that stuff. It was very much follow the things you love, work hard, be grateful for every opportunity, show up in the right way, like lead your life with integrity type thing, and everything else will follow. So yeah, they were really supportive of everything my sister and I have done, and it's been a very, circuitous path. It's not always been a straightforward one, and they've just been very supportive. And I think that's such an important thing. Like, I think it's so empowering when parents support their children in that way rather than force them to be this mold or like you have to do these things because they somehow see it as a reflection of who they are.
I completely agree. It's so powerful. And you clearly have, there's a lot of confidence that you've built there, both with your business as well as your personal brand. Where did you get that confidence to go out and build your personal brand at the same time? Because obviously it's a lot of work with the personal brand and the business.
I mean, it is, and it is what it is, right? Like, work is work.
That's the truest thing I've ever heard.
I like people get like, oh, or like this will take time. I'm like, time goes by anyways. This is another one of the things my dad always used to say, because anytime I was younger, they'd be like, oh, that's going to take years to do or whatever. And he's like, and those years are going to go by anyways. So you might as well be more ahead then than you are now.
Yeah,
Which I think as a kid is sort of hard to understand. Like, time feels so different when you were young. And
it
then when you
does.
get older, it's so different, and you're like, ah. So now I get it. And this is such a silly. I'll give you a very silly example, but it's so fitting. So I recently got Invisalign
Oh,
because, and I had
congrats.
braces as a kid thing.
I think congrats is what you say.
Yeah, but I feel like they were moving a little bit. So I was like, all right, well, let me go take care of this before it gets worse or whatnot. And well, I'm young, my teeth are good health. Like, let's go do this. And it's funny because the doctor was like, oh, okay, this could take 18 months or whatever. And I was like, okay, fine. And it's so funny because I remembered my dad's thing, and if you're like, oh, time goes anyways, right? It's like those 18 months. Hopefully, you're gonna be alive, and they'll pass anyways. So you might as well do something while you're also to straighten your teeth more while you're going through that phase. So I think it just applies to so many things in life. And so part of it is also not expecting overnight success. So when I started, I never thought, okay, I'm going to do this and this will be it. Like, let's go viral. That's not how I think. That's not how I encourage my clients to think.
Yeah, that's an uphill battle, that's for sure.
It's crazy. I mean, so things take time. Things that are worth it take time. And people don't want to put in the time. People don't want to put in the work. And so building my personal brand was a strategic decision. It didn't come from a place of vanity or glory. It came from a place of I want to educate and share my thoughts. And people do connect with individuals more than they connect with companies. And then I started speaking. Like that's the crazy thing too. When I started speaking, I was speaking for free, right? I was just trying to educate people and audiences, and
Hmm.
I'd speak wherever. People were so hungry for this topic, and so breakfasts and dinners, like whatever. And then I did so much of it. And I invested too. That's the thing. I thought, okay, well, I want to continue this also as a career path. Like I love speaking. How do I do more of it? So I continue to grow my keynote speaking career, and of course, doing it now for 10 years, and I've keynoted for so many major brands and organizations, and
Yeah, your
learned so
speaking resume
much.
is unbelievable.
It's so much fun. I mean, I love it. I absolutely love being on stage and connecting with the audience, because as much as I
Mhm.
enjoy the digital, there's something really cool about being sharing energy with other humans, like in their presence, right?
Yeah, that's a really cool way to look at it, and that's again sort of back to the connected consumer. That's connected in a different way, connecting with people, but it all goes back to connections.
And people want that. People want that connectedness for sure. And so I loved it. But part of that is also, people are like, oh, you're speaking all these things, and you get paid all these, crazy keynote fees. And I'm like, yes, and it's taken over a decade of presenting and learning. Like I know how to engage an audience, right? It's not something I knew right away, but I work on it. Like even the other weekend, I actually was in an acting workshop
I love it.
to learn, and it was like, oh, it's acting, but there's similarities in performance and how you perform and how you project and how you stand on stage, like all these factors. So
Hmm.
for me, it's like, if whatever you want to do, not only do you have to do it as and grow, but you have to keep learning and investing in yourself. Like I'm a student for life. There's a student ID card. I should have it, because and in my field especially, you're always learning. You're either a student or you're irrelevant. Like the only way you can really grow is to constantly learn. So I'm constantly learning from my peers, and putting myself in like acting. It's so different. It's not speaking or marketing, but there's overlap. So I'm always looking to broaden my horizons.
There is, and we will metaphorically award you the Wild Business Growth Podcast student ID. You're the first one
Thank
ever.
you. Thank you. I like that. That's a good one.
You deserve it. You show it off, shout it from the rooftops.
Now, what kind of discounts can I get with that kind of student ID, huh?
There you go. You can get yeah, you'll get some pretty cool hippo
I'm gonna
experience.
try to go to the movies and be like, no, it's legit, really. Like
No,
you gotta ask Max.
it's real. It's real. Yeah, it's but when you're speaking, how do you decide what topics to cover?
So for me, it's very much client driven, and I'm very much a client speaker, which means it's whatever the client wants that I deliver, right? And
Hmm.
it seems straightforward, but it's not always. Sometimes a client can say, "Oh, our audience is not excited about this. We need to get them excited, and here's why." Or like you're delivering for the client, you're serving your client. And so my content tends to be very much, what does the client want this audience to understand? So if I'm hired for an internal keynote, it might be they're rolling out something and they want people to get on board by understanding how the broader world is changing, right?
Hmm.
Or if it's I'm at a conference, like I mean, and there's so many, there's almost no industry where I haven't spoken or have some.
They're making up industries for you.
Yeah, I mean, the world is vast, and thank God for it. And so, but yeah, I was at a conference, for example, for hair salon owners called Sirius, which is in New Orleans, and it was a lot
Mhm.
of fun. But part of that with the content then is obviously about how is it relevant to them. And for me, that's the important part. Like even when I come on a podcast like this, Max, it's for me, it's yes, I can sit here and talk about myself, but how can I tie that in? What will make this for someone as a listener, as I listen? I hate it when I feel like my time is wasted, or I'm like, okay, come on, like tell me tell me what's helpful, what's useful, and time it's more valuable than it's ever been. And that is one thing that's changed, is how much differently we view time and value it and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's important to be able to cater to that. So for me, when I'm in an audience, I'm very cognizant of who are these people? What does the client want them to walk away with? So I always ask every client of mine, I said, when I finish speaking, what is it that you want them to walk away with that would make you feel like this was a success? And you would be surprised as to how different the answers are. Sometimes it's like, I want them to start really thinking. It's okay if they're a little agitated. Get them thinking.
Get them
It just
agitated.
needs to get them pushed a little bit, right? So where they're like really kind of fired up. Other times it's like, we really want them to, like your closing keynote or your opening keynote, like, just really want to make sure that they get pumped up for, we have 4 days of like this crazy, they have a crazy schedule, and we want them to have enough energy to push through those 4 days and be really excited about it. Okay. So part of it is, understanding kind of like, what does the client want from you to deliver, not just content, because that's honestly the quote unquote easy part. Like, I know what I'm talking about. It's the experience you want them to walk away with. And that's what you work to deliver on.
Yeah. And I think that applies to any business with clients. It's so important to look at it on a case by case basis and not just have a blanket approach to everything, because you really need to cater to each specific need and problem there. So I totally get that. Shama, in this case, definitely feel free to keep talking about yourself, because we love it. That's what this podcast is for. So don't don't shy away from that. There's so many elements of your background and what you're doing and your story that are so inspiring in itself, that I think there's so much to learn just from you opening up and talking about your story. So so we'll continue to talk about you for this episode, of course.
Okay.
Hey, Wild listeners, have you been wanting to start a podcast for yourself or your business but didn't know where to start? Or do you have a podcast of your own but you're struggling with the time commitment? I'd love to help. Shoot me an email at max@hippodirect.com with any podcasting questions you have. I'm also happy to jump on a 30-minute call where we can discuss your idea, planning, production, promotion, and other elements of the podcasting world. Let your podcast run wild. So let's move on to a segment on inspiration and creativity. So a few different areas here. Think about people that inspire you, hobbies that inspire you, different resources. I know you might be a little bit into research, as you've pointed out. So first question, what do you do to stay creative?
I think part of it is understanding that creativity is not a byproduct of anything you do. It's kind of what's naturally available to everybody, right? So it's more, what do I do to remove blocks from keeping, like, I'm a pretty creative individual. I think we as human beings are creators. We're creative. What happens though is it gets blocked. And it gets blocked by a few things. It gets blocked by your own little gremlins in your head, right? Your mindset.
Those damn gremlins.
Yes, it gets blocked by other people's gremlins talking to you. It gets blocked by your ego and competition, and why is this person doing better than I am, kind of, or like, why am I not there yet? Or I should be doing better. Like, there's so many things that I think block creativity. Or, this has to work because I've got to make XYZ rather than what do I really want? Why do I want it? So for me, it's really funny. Like, when I feel like I'm in a funk, right, in a creativity funk, I find a few things that are helpful. One, I find that dogs are like the perfect antidote to every creative block ever.
There you go. Okay, so
I say this. Yes, and I say this with love, and I'm an animal person in general, but like, I love dogs. I have 3 dogs.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got 2 Maltipoos and a giant Schnauzer. So
that's quite the combo.
Yeah, they don't live in the same house. I've got 2 in Texas and one in Florida.
Wow.
And I split my time quite a bit between the states. But I find that nothing helps me more than just playing with them, because dogs are so present, and they're a reason that people, like, we use animals in therapy.
Hmm.
And it's because they have this amazing ability where, he doesn't have gremlins in his head. Well, the only gremlins are the ones in his stomach wanting treats. But like, there's no, dogs don't do negative self-talk, and
There's
they
no
don't.
stomach gremlins.
Yeah, and they don't look at the other dogs and wonder why they're taller and run faster, and you
Yeah,
know.
it's funny to think about. In addition to dogs and animals, what other ways are you that expert gremlin remover? How do you get those gremlins out of there?
Gremlins that it's I think that every output problem is an input problem. And what I mean by that is what you put in, not just what you eat, but like the things you listen to, the people you surround yourself with, the ecosystem you create around yourself. That is a direct, that is what your life reflects.
Yeah.
And so part of this is even like, I tend to become a lot more, just like when I feel like, man, I want to get a little more fit, or want to get my health back on track. We all slip. So then it's like, then what do we naturally do? We start eating healthier. We start drinking more water. We start exercising more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in this case, you do the same. You start say, what books am I reading? Who am I listening to? What do I, and for me, because I am, I'm what you call an extrovert, which is an extrovert, but you need, so it's it's a pretty good 50-50.
Yeah, omnivert or ambivert. What I always confuse those.
Yeah,
The mix.
yeah, I'm a pretty decent mix, but I would say it's slightly more like on the extroverted side, right? So it's like probably a 60-40. But what I find for me then, what feeds the introvert side is obviously a nice cup of tea with the dogs and just really being in the moment. And the extrovert side loves events. Like I will seek out like, okay, what conference can I go attend?
Mhm.
What crosses my path that will really be empowering and positive?
Right. And what can I use my student ID for?
Yeah, what can I do for? But part of that is just that. It's what you surround yourself with and how you really immerse yourself into, your overall, like, your ecosystem. So, which friends do I talk to who are positive and are encouraging and are doing cool stuff? So part of it is just that, like, I see what can I do to put myself out there that'll help boost things for me. That is a great way to sort of beat the gremlins, if you will.
Yeah, we're going to be sponsored by the Gremlins movie franchise. But I agree with that as well. I mean, you hear it so often. Some people really subscribe to the theory that, actually, a lot of people subscribe to the theory that you're the average of your 5 best friends. And whether that's an exact science or not, I think it totally depends who you surround yourself with. That really reflects who you are. And that could be friends, that could be family, that could be work associates, team members, all that. So that's spot on there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my mom would always say like birds of a feather flock together, and
And then she
I
drops the
thought there
mic.
was more like a reflection. Well, it's funny because I thought it was a reflection, right? Like, oh, okay, you guys are similar, so you're hanging out. But it took until I got older to realize what she's actually saying is you get to choose your friends, and
Mhm.
then and then be able to. It is funny because again, when you're a kid, you hear that and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, we're friends because we're similar, not hey, I've chosen these friends and so I'm becoming more like them. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
which is right. So and I think that is the beauty of being an adult is finding sort of the right people to surround yourself with. And the cool thing is I think it's so much easier today to do that in some ways. Like you don't have to have 5 best friends who are super successful, making all this money and doing all these things and really have it together. It's what you're listening to, like the podcast you're listening to, like this one, the
Yeah.
books you're reading, the people you're following, but this overall, like you have so much more power. I think before, one of the challenges when you're in earlier days is like you kind of have to physically seek out those people, right? You didn't have as much, like sure
Uh-huh.
you could, but today you can learn from such a vast, like you're not limited to your neighborhood, you're not limited to your geography, you're only limited by your own imagination and your own ability or inclination.
Certainly. Yeah. The world is more connected than, than ever thought possible. Who, you mentioned a lot of different ways to learn, which we know you love learning. I love learning as well. I mean, it never stops. So I'll get my student ID as well. But what are your favorite books that come to mind?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many great books. I mean, I could share a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people might have heard of,
Uh-huh.
but I will share one that I don't think many people are familiar with, and I
Sure.
quite have found her work very seminal, and I turn to it back. I'm amazed at how often I go back to the books and audio, especially given that it was written in 1920s. There is an author, of course she's long past now, but her name is Florence Scovel Shinn, and she
A
was a
little tongue twister.
metaphysics teacher. Yeah, like Florence Nightingale, I guess. But Florence Scovel Shinn, and she was a metaphysics teacher in the 20s and 30s, and long before Tony Robbins, and long before you know.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because, and she's got a few books. It's called The Game of Life, and it's funny because there's certain things that are so anachronistic in the book. Like she talks about, and by the way, if you're on Spotify, they're available as books on Spotify. You can listen to them too. So I tend to
Well,
listen to a lot of stuff when I
shout
am
out
in my
Spotify.
car. Yeah, so it's a fun way to do it. And then it's just funny because, some of the stuff is like, and then I sent a postcard and waited like 8 days. you know, or going to the cinema is like the silent movies or whatever. So
Yeah, that's different time for sure.
yes, but the concepts are amazingly familiar, of kind of surrounding yourself with certain thoughts and what that means, and how to fight those gremlins. And but yes, I find that that's, while I read so much, that just tends to be an author and book that I often find myself turning back to, especially when I feel like I kind of need that boost, or it would be helpful to have that.
Yeah. It's cool that you found something from so long ago that still is interesting and powerful in a way to learn today. And you talked about audiobooks. You ever listen to podcasts as well? Or are you pretty loyal to the audiobook category?
Oh no, I listen to podcasts. I listen to a variety of things. I'm more interested about the content than the podcast itself. So it's less about like,
Mm.
oh, I'll listen to every episode, but if something really catches my eye, or someone I want to listen to. So
Like if you see a guest, like
it's a
guest or topic of it.
combination.
Hmm.
Yes. I will say it's a little weird for me. I read faster than I listen. So I think I can read a book faster than I can listen to an audio
Really?
program or whatnot. Yeah. So it's
Like
I mean,
how fast reading are we talking? Do you have any like
pretty
stats
fast.
or really?
Pretty fast.
That's
Yeah.
that's something I wish I had. Like I love reading, and each year I get more into reading, but I read like a snail, so
Oh yeah. And
it
then
makes
there's
it more
nothing.
difficult.
I just did it from a really from a young age. I read, and it was more like a hunger, so I could, like, you just like people who eat really fast, and they're like, yeah, I had like
That's
six
me. That's more
siblings.
like me.
So like I had six brothers, so I like learned to eat fast. So it was just kind of funny, and I feel like I was like that with books. Like I was like, oh my god, I don't know how I got a book. Like I'm so excited, I need to finish this. So
Oh
I think part of that is a remnant. But
yes,
yeah, like I guess funnily, I aced my verbal SATs and I still had like 40 minutes left. And so I think part of it is just being able to, my math score was horrendous, so don't get that excited. But
oh well, there's calculators. We got you
it was
covered.
really bad. My math score was like, I mean, I think you get more points just in putting your name on the paper than I did. But my verbal side is
Well, I
very
struggle with
strong.
that part
So.
as well. No, I'm just kidding. Um, that's amazing. Well, I that's an incredible skill to have. But I think what's so cool about it is it stems back to your excitement and passion for things. So that's amazing. But I'm definitely more of the quick eater type.
Yeah, it's funny, they see that even with kids. Like, there's kids who they say, there's one story that I'm remembering from a teacher who said that she felt like the kid was not learning, or couldn't was not like, she wondered if he had issues learning things. And
Mhm.
then they started studying dinosaurs, and she quickly found out he has no problem learning things.
Right. Yeah,
It
it's a
was just
subject
about
matter.
a topic, yeah, that interested him.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was like a little dinosaur expert, so it's just
Yeah.
funny to.
Yeah, that's how I am with reading too. Like early on in school, and I think back to like elementary school, I hated reading because you have to read the books that they assign to you, and I just found most of them boring. But I actually my third grade teacher, Mrs. Parmalee, who I'm sure is listening and enjoys the shout out, she she found out what I was interested in, and she recommended the book Hatchet by Gary Paulson, and it was the first book I ever read.
Yes.
The first book I ever read that I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. Reading might actually be kind of fun. And since then, I've only read books that I found interesting.
So kids are so lucky in that would like, so I think what's funny is I grew up in India till I was 9, and there
Mhm.
was no library for kids. So the
Oh, wow.
library was for college age kids. So I didn't read my first novel until I came to the States and I was in the fourth
No way.
grade. Yeah, and
Huh.
my first novel was Charlotte's Web.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Oh,
and
that's a classic too.
I'd never read like a storybook like that before, like, yes, you'd read like little kiddie books, but then that was sort of my first foray into like a literary like novel as a child.
Yeah.
And it was such a, yeah, it was such a, and I was like, and then I walked in the library and they said, you can take these books. And I was like, what do you mean you can take these books? And they were like, oh, as long as you read them and bring them back. And I think that's how my love affair with like, the reading started. And I remember being, I don't know, like 8th grade, and I had finished so many books in the middle school library. I would go and I would ask my librarian, I was like, do you have anything new? And she was like, since last week, no. So,
Wow.
but I can only imagine like what would have happened if I'd had a Kindle back then or something.
Oh my God.
It would have
Yeah.
been
Yeah. It's
crazy.
good thing that wasn't around it. You'd blow through
I
multiple
know.
Kindos.
My parents would be like, "What is this $10,000 bill that we have for
Whoops.
Amazon?" Like those would be books. Yeah, so crazy.
Yeah. So let's move to a fan favorite section called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Okay.
Um, so, Wild Business Shout of the Week is where we talk about a recent campaign that caught our attention. And earlier, you were mentioning the recent Adobe summit that went on. Can you talk about that for a little bit and how they approach that summit?
Yeah, so Adobe, I think it's a cool brand doing lots of really neat things in that they're enterprise, but they grew from being like this PDF company that they're known as, but they've got such a suite of services now and have really made their mark. One of the cool things is, of course, they have the Adobe Summit every year, which is this huge group of marketers that come in and lots of topics. And what I thought was interesting was this year they really did a big push to integrate influencers. And on the record, I was one of those influencers that they invited and said, come participate. And they had this, they really made it a nice experience. But the reviews and like the reach they got from influencer usage across the board far outweighed anything they could have done with a
Right.
traditional spend, no matter how much, because it was so targeted and it was so credible, right? Like it's
Right.
so big. I mean, I'm sure they got millions and millions of dollars
Yeah.
worth of what the equivalent of what ads would have done in a much more higher converting their audience targeted way. So I thought that was a really cool way for a brand to approach it.
Yeah, well, they are a cool brand, and we previously had on Joe Martin, who was at Adobe. He's at Cloud Out now, but on the show, who's an influencer in a way of himself. I mean, he's just amazing with dad jokes on Twitter. but
Yeah.
but Joe, I know you guys were at the conference together, but Adobe is a very, very cool company and creative company, and clearly they're in touch with the times because everybody's talking about influencer marketing now, and there's so many different ways to hone in and capture and to use influencer marketing to your advantage. But this is the first I've heard about it from a conference standpoint. So that's amazing that they did that, and it's really cool that you experienced it kind of from the other side of things. What and you don't have to give any financial figures or anything, but when they reached out to you, what was it that appealed to you that you said, okay, you know what, I'm in?
So a couple of things. I mean, look, like obviously they understood how to work with influencers, and I worked with so many brands. I mean, it's not just Adobe. I worked with Verizon and AT&T and Chase,
Yeah.
and so it's not uncommon for me to collaborate with brands, especially when they're B2B, they're trying to reach this professional audience, and it makes a lot of sense. What I look for is someone who, does it match my audience? So that's the first thing. Like, is this valuable? Can I go and bring something back? Like, am I sharing good content? Am I creating good content? Like, what am I sharing that makes this valuable? So that's the
Right.
first thing I look for. Then obviously I have to look at what is just from what's on the table. Just like with keynotes, I love speaking, but I can only accept so many because I also have a company to run. I have personal responsibilities and a family. Like, you have to just look at the big picture. Like, what can you do and what can you not do? So so
That's
obviously
true.
that matters. And I actually spoke to another company who we do work. That's the thing. I'm an influencer and I'm on the client side when we're working with them on influencer marketing, right? And so part of what we've had to do even with our clients is like, guys, you got to up your budget. Like, the reach that you're going to get, it's not the same. It used to be that you could give influencers a few swag pieces. Like, the bar was lower. Now the bar is higher. I think it's still so cheap compared to what traditional advertising costs. So
Hmm.
it's still a great deal. I don't think people realize what a great deal it is, and they won't until like 5 years later. Just like Google ads were so cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Everything.
people were like, and not everyone did it because they were like, oh, why am I paying for this? Like, it's 50 cents a click. Are you kidding? That same
Mhm.
click today is $50. So
Yeah.
you've got to be
That's a
able to
hell of a
ride
point.
you have to be able to go where the attention is with what's working. And right now, influencer marketing has such a great ROI that it just makes all the sense in the world.
Absolutely. And Adobe just nailed it with their summit too.
Yeah.
So that's a great example. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you
they did a
bringing that up.
great job. So
Hmm. So we only got a little bit of time left. I'd love to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
sure.
All right, let's get wild. You are based in Dallas, at least most of the time in Dallas. I spent a summer there my junior year of college, so it's very close to home for me. Not geographically, but metaphorically.
Okay.
What's your favorite part of living in Dallas?
So I know it's a rapid fire, but now I live in Miami and Dallas. Like, I have two,
Right,
I
yes.
have, I have two homes. Dallas, I think the coolest part of Dallas is it's a great community. So there's so much affection, and it is very much a tight knit community. I think, which is cool, right? In the sense that it feels neighborly. Like, Dallas, I think in some ways feels smaller than it is. It's massive, but you
I
definitely
agree.
have that kind of southern hospitality feel. Like, I always hug people. I'm like, it's such a Texan thing to do.
It's great.
But yeah, so I love that kind of the southern, I think, culture. People are warmer. It's nice. It's probably one of my favorite things about Dallas.
Yeah, I was in the Las Colinas area by Irving, and I was blown away too. I totally agree. Like it is a huge city when you think about it, but it just didn't feel that way. And it was so easy to get downtown and uptown and every direction town. It was just
Right,
it's a fun spot.
right, for sure.
And you've spoke all around the world. What's your favorite place that you've ever traveled to?
I mean, I have to say for what, right? Because I travel so much for different things. I have different cities, I think, that are favorite for different things. Like, I love London. London is one of my favorite cities
Mhm.
because there's just such a buzz. It's kind of like New York, right? There's so much buzz.
Right. It's
It's
huge. Mhm.
yeah, it's such a metropolitan. Like, there's so much to do. I love Paris for the food, like French food. It's great for a
Oh,
reason,
you're
but
stealing my other
like
question. No, I'm just kidding.
okay, well, it's fun, and so yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've got multiple favorite haunts around the world that I love for various different reasons.
Gotta love those haunts. And on that food note, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, like one specific food item, what would that be?
Chocolate.
That's
I
a
would
great
just
example.
survive off of it.
Yeah. Milk or dark or white or other kind.
Milk chocolate, milk for sure. Yes,
Mm,
good
awesome.
quality chocolate, by the way, not like the.
Of course.
I'm not a candy fan. I love chocolate.
Really?
Not. I just want to make that distinction. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty
Sometimes I
sweet.
think people who like grew up here do not know the difference. But if you ever travel to Europe or outside the world, like, their bar for chocolate, what you can call chocolate, is so much higher than our own.
Yeah. What's your biggest pet peeve?
I, It's a good question. I think complaining without doing something about it, like just fix it. I think that kind of drives me
Right.
crazy. Where someone's like, "This is like the 80th time you've complained about something that would take you 20 minutes to fix."
Yeah, you spent so much time talking about it.
So much energy, I know. So yeah, I would say
Yeah.
that's definitely a pet peeve.
Okay, and then last question here. Weird talents. So, what's a talent that you have that maybe not might not be the most useful, or it's kind of random? Like, for example, well, I guess you've already talked about reading really quick. That would be an example. But anything else you can think of that is kind of random, but you're like really, really good at it?
Can I have an anti-talent?
Sure, anti-talent's welcome.
I no, I'm a terrible singer, like god awful. Like if yeah, I
Ooh.
mean, just it's bad. Like it's I'd say anti-talent because I think like I could crack the glass and things, but not in a good way. So if
That's
I ever really
impressive.
had to harass someone, yeah, I
I'm
know
right. I'm right there with you with the singing.
it's
I'm in the same boat.
terrible. Which it is particularly hard because my husband has an amazing voice. He comes from a family of like musicians for fun, and
Really?
he's an entrepreneur too. Yeah, he's just got this. He sang at our wedding. It was wonderful. He sang
Wow,
Lee Bryce's "I Don't Dance."
that's
It's one of my favorite
incredible.
songs. Yeah, he's got this amazing voice, and I always feel awful because when he's singing, I try to sing along, and I'm like, oh God, I totally ruined it. He never
Wow.
feels that way, of course. I have to say, I guess that's love, right, for you.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
no, it's not, it's not awful. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I would say that's sort of an anti-talent for sure.
I
But
like it.
I would say like a freaky talent that is not that's so not useful in perhaps the real world in any way. But I'm really good at guessing how a movie ends.
Really.
Like within the first 10 minutes, I can tell you what's going to happen and how the movie ends.
And what's your accuracy? Like you're like 90%
Pretty
accurate.
good. Yeah, like pretty damn good. Like 95% accurate as to what like I'm like, this is what I think of.
Wow. Without giving away the ending, can you name a movie that comes to mind that you've done that and you nailed it? You don't have to say, just don't say the ending.
Okay, you're like, don't spoil it. God, what was like the girl with the dragon tattoo?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they're
Oh,
just
that
weird.
one.
Like, yeah, there's just
Right
some.
away, you're like, ah.
Well, yeah. So I'm probably not people's favorite moviegoer person. When
Do you say it out loud too when you're there?
um, only to like the people that know me really well. So like to my parents or my husband, like people who would just be like, of course, like
Yeah.
who know they can still enjoy the movie with me with my, which is yeah, which is just so funny because my husband will always tell people he's like Shama loves spoilers. She like she doesn't she just I'll be like just tell me the ending. He's like don't you want to watch it? I'm like no, just tell me what happens.
Get to the point already.
So yeah, like just
Wow.
tell me how this thing ends. But
That's
anyway,
crazy.
so
Oh, I love it. Well, that's an incredible freaky talent as well. I like the way you described that. So that's powerful. Also, just by the nature of both of our singing voices, we will not sign off with the duet here. So I'll save you on that one.
thank you.
but we are just about to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Shama, for coming on and sharing your story and all the stuff about your background and all sorts of different topics. This was amazing. Really, really appreciate you making the time to hop on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Max.
Of course. So, where's the best place for people to connect with you and to connect with Zen Media?
Zenmedia.com, obviously, and then shamahyder.com. You can, of course, always Google it. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Choose your poison. Happy to connect. Instagram, obviously.
Absolutely. And now, stage is yours. Final thoughts, whatever you want to end with. And I'm sure this will be a solo singing session, but however you want to end, up to you.
Yeah, well, I just think it's so easy. I think sometimes listen to these podcasts and think about, to incorporate everything. But I would say anytime I listen to a podcast, what's helpful for me is what's the one thing that you could take away and apply? Because I think application beats everything else hands down, right? So I would just say if you've listened to this and you've enjoyed it and you've enjoyed Max and my banter, think about the one thing that might be helpful for you and wherever you are in life and how you can take that and apply it.
Those are final thoughts with serious application. Thank you, Shama, for coming on the podcast. And thank you, Wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you're looking for more creativity tips, marketing ideas, productivity hacks, and more, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also skim through copious amounts of business resources at hippodirect.com/blog and hippodirect.com/newsletter. That newsletter is the Hippo Digest, and it's your weekly recap of creative marketing from all around the web. And finally, come say hey or whatever your preferred greeting is on social media at the handles Hippo Direct and Max Brandstetter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!